We have a new series on the channel. Lo-Fi and Theorize is its technical name. It's kind of like a FNAF What If series. Today we've really only got one topic to talk about, but in future episodes there's going to be much more. But today, the theory that we have is about Gregory. And the theory is essentially that the Into the Pit game is giving us some insight into his backstory. Now, before we dive in, I want to assure you that I am aware that there are a lot of counters / evidence that completely blow like nearly every piece of this concept and hypothesis I cooked up here out of the water. But this is solely for fun, so bear with me here. Okay, that was bad. Alright, so Into the Pit game. Why do I think that Into the Pit gives us insight about Gregory's backstory? And the answer is sometimes a timeline gets so full that the only way to tell a real story is have the story set in a different timeline, an alternate universe, a different location. That's a Scott Cawthon quote, and I think that this kind of applies here. So my takeaway here is that the GGY Easter egg that we find in the Into the Pit game isn't simply an Easter egg. I think the fact that GGY is here at all is a way of showing us that the story is actually giving us Gregory's backstory. Then I think if we look back to the security breach therapy session tapes, we can find more connections to Gregory and form a somewhat coherent story from all of this. So first of all, I want you to think back to the patient 46 therapy sessions. One of the last sessions the therapist has, they say this to patient 46. To quote, "Want to guess what I found when I looked into the tragedy of your past? All that stuff about your parents? You aren't even going to look at me? Fine. You can look at the floor all you want. But it won't change the fact that none of what you said in your file about your parents was true. The truth is, you had great parents, a great childhood. Why did you lie?" And this is probably the biggest stretch of this entire theory, but if you can go with this one, then you're going to be good for the rest. It was immediately clear when I played Into the Pit that Oswald has a very good relationship with his family, all things considered. In his inventory of items, he's always bringing up really fun family stories they've shared together. And while it's cute, it also seems very unlike any other FNAF games before it. I'm not implying that Oswald is Gregory, but more that the story themes are likely tying us back to Gregory. It actually hasn't been super common in FNAF stories to see a healthy, happy family, so I couldn't help but notice that Oswald's family kind of stood out in that sense. But the other reason I just thought it was important is because while it may be a stretch, the fact that this was in a therapy session tape does make it seem quite important, so I've kind of been on the lookout for a family that was really good and like their son had a really good like upbringing and childhood and whatnot. So the fact that that was in the therapist tape is kind of why I made that connection there. So what happened to Gregory? I think Into the Pit gives us a glimpse into what happened to Gregory when we get one of the bad endings in the Into the Pit game. Oswald walks through the pizzeria and is confused that the animatronics are waving at him and are being friendly towards him. So there are a few important things in this ending that I want to point out. One is that on the surface level, Oswald is still intact during this ending, even after he got munched on by the yellow rabbit, which could imply that he's been recreated as a robot or has an animatronic skeleton inside of him. Is it possible that Gregory was actually killed when Glitchtrap took his mind over? If we're like pulling themes or ideas from this story back to Gregory, then I don't really think that's that far-fetched. I know MatPat had a theory about Gregory being a robot, so I'm not completely throwing the idea out, especially when we take into account the next part of this ending that I want to talk about. The second part of this ending that I want to talk about is to look closely at the animatronics waving to Oswald. Where have we seen this waving style before? It's so specific, like they're literally posed exactly like Glitchtrap is in Help Wanted. This is the exact wave that Glitchtrap does, which is, again, it's just another reason that I think this is trying to push us back to Gregory's story. But speaking of Glitchtrap, who is it that takes over Vanessa's mind? It's Glitchtrap, right? Which is leading me back to the idea that Gregory, after being caught, is possibly turned into a robot of sorts, like I said before. I have two reasons to think this, though. I'm not just saying it randomly. So the first is that in Security Breach, after Glamrock Freddy receives Roxy's eyes, he looks at Gregory and says that,
"You look different to me."
which it's like, yeah, that could just be like him being able to see through things, and they're just emphasizing that he can see through walls and he can see through people, and so he sees Gregory's skeleton. You could argue that, you really could, but it's a really, really weird thing to even say, and so if that's I just don't feel like they would include that if it didn't mean something more, like Gregory is something different. So that's like the first reason that I think maybe he's got different insides than normal humans would. But the second is that Into the Pit actually shows us what animatronic like kids are being turned into. And so I assume this would mean like what animatronic Gregory actually is. And it's a weird one. So the same ending of the Into the Pit game that I just showed you with the animatronics waving at Oswald, it has an achievement when you get the ending on Steam. But essentially the achievement pops up and with it is a picture of Oswald's face and it's half human, half animatronic. And the animatronic that it shows is none other than a mini Music Man. Now, it's possible I'm wrong. Maybe that's a different animatronic. You tell me. But it sure looks like one. And if you're confused as to why on earth this is, let me take you back to Security Breach again to clear all this up. So, there's a duffel bag message, you know, like the email or whatever, in Security Breach that reads as follows. Well, somehow, someone broke into a Rockstar Row display case and stole the wind-up Music Man prototypes. The case was smashed and there's glass on the floor but no sign of a break-in. Nothing else seems to be missing. I have absolutely no idea how they got into the building and there's nothing on the security footage. Now what should I do? Should I call the police and report a break-in? Vanessa. We already know that Vanessa's been deleting emails and stuff, so this is no surprise she's trying to cover her own tracks and be like, yo, someone did this, it clearly wasn't me. So it's clearly like the Vanessa, Vanny, or if you think that Vanessa and Vanny are separate characters, it doesn't really matter, like whichever. It's still the fact that these went missing and they've been used for something, and it's very likely that these were used on the victims to try and like create these robots. And now they finally got the system down with Gregory, then they finally succeeded. And maybe some of the other kids, they succeeded as well. We don't really know as much, but we're not even done there, because after this, I have one last connection. This kind of explains why in Ruin, we see all of these mini Music Men wandering around, because if Vanessa was freed, then those experiments are no longer needed. And so they find a way out of the building and they're just kind of wandering around now. And even if like it means that Vanny is still down there like doing things or whatever, regardless of what you think Vanny becomes after the ending of Security Breach, then it's still, either way, it still makes sense that the mini Music Men are out now, because either she's using them for her own thing now, or they're just wandering around there, just doing their own thing now. So essentially, what this theory is trying to say is that Into the Pit is showing us, like, subtly, what happened to Gregory. I'm not saying that Oswald's supposed to be Gregory. It's just like they're essentially using Oswald to tell the story of what happened to some of the kids at the Pizzaplex, specifically Gregory. So he goes to the Pizzaplex, and then I assume one of the arcade games, maybe the Balloon Boy one even. I don't really know how all that would work, but like, since all the arcade games are kind of glitched, it makes sense that that's how they get Gregory in the same way. Vanessa was taken over through the VR game. But anyway, somehow he gets caught at some point and then turned into one of these mini Music Men, and so now he's a robot. And then we know by the time Security Breach starts, he's no longer like acting necessarily on Glitchtrap's behalf. So something happened before Security Breach, and that's a whole nother theory that I do have a few theories on. But for this theory, we're just mainly saying Gregory did have a good childhood, and Into the Pit confirms that, essentially. It's not that he is Oswald, it's that it's kind of parallels. It's like, oh, that's supposed to be talking about Gregory. So Gregory has the good childhood, he goes to the Pizzaplex, and the pizza place that Oswald goes to is just like a different timeline version of Gregory going to the Pizzaplex, essentially. So it's just like they're kind of interchangeable almost. And so this is just essentially what happens to Gregory. And that's why the animatronics are waving like Glitchtrap, because they're showing us through Into the Pit that this is essentially what happened with Glitchtrap and his victims. And so you can just imply that that's probably what happened to Gregory, and then Freddy being weirded out by what he looks like and stuff. It all kind of connects. And then seeing the mini Music Men in Ruin, it just all made sense. So, do I actually believe all this? No, I don't. But is it fun to think about? Yes, it is. And that's essentially what this channel is all about. It's not that we actually believe these theories, because the hardest part to believe of this one, I think, is just the having a good family thing, because we also have, like, in the actual FNAF movie, that family looked pretty happy before their son got kidnapped. So you can't necessarily grab that much of a stretch, but the reason I thought it worked so well is because of the therapy session tape where Gregory did have a good family. And so I've been on the lookout in the games to like have that shown to us, because why would they mention that if it wasn't like somehow supposed to be for us to pick up on later on. So that's kind of all I've got, essentially. That's Gregorys' backstory in this theory. Let me know what you think. I know this is pretty out there and pretty goofy, but that's what this sub channel on our channel is all about. We just are here to talk about theories that we know aren't really perfect. They don't always add up with things, they're just fun to think about. And that's all I got. Thanks for watching.